The November 2021 Unfound Newsletter. Hello, everyone. How was everyone's October 2021? And as I write this, I have to ask, how was everybody's Halloween? I dressed up as a true crime podcaster. You should know that this is the first file I am writing or recording after getting my new HP laptop. That Dell I had, well, still have, was starting to scare me. And I had a prior experience with a Dell that was fine for 4 years, and then all of a sudden it died with all of my unfound files on it. That happened during August 2017. So I wanted to make sure I avoided that disaster again. The keyboard on the Dell had started typing all by itself. Endless streams of symbols, numbers, and letters across the screen. And really, it had been ticking me off well before that. Probably for like a year. I never did like the thumb pad on it. Sometimes it would take like 20 minutes to start, etc., etc., etc. Thus, it's gone. My assistant Natasha had just gotten an HP, so I decided to follow her lead. We shall see how it goes. I'm fantastic. Disc golf was okay in October. Not great, not terrible. Dad is good. He's going to all of Slippery Rock's football games. I got some really nice new Egyptian cotton sheets for my bed. I got a set in black. I got a set in like darker red. Yes, unfound colors. I have 2 more stints at the dentist before I'm all back to new. I went to the dentist last week. All in all, everything is good in Ed Dental land. I also went to the doctor this month and got a absolute clean bill of health. In fact, he said I'm healthier this year than I was last year. Let's start this newsletter where I usually do. Upcoming episodes. November 5th, Alicia Markovich. November 12th, Audrey Herron. And in that episode, there will be 2 interviews. Other disappearances we are working on. Lonene Rogers, Bonnie Hutton, Irma McCurchian, I know that's a one you keep seeing on the list, still working on it, and Carl Woolsey, which is just a fairly new one. Okay, as you would expect, I have a lot to write about given what occurred over the last 31 days. First, the Pankey trial. I'm not going to talk about the entire free Patreon blog all over again. I'm hoping that you listened to that free blog about my experience in Greeley, Colorado, so I'm not going to go through all that again. Hopefully you've listened to it or read it. I hope you have because it's important. Me appearing there on the stand is a huge moment for Unfound, if not the entire true crime podcasting community. And that's what I want to write about in this section of the newsletter. Once again, I notice I say that a lot. If you want to hear the step-by-step happening of me being in Greeley, please go to patreon.com and listen or read the blog. So why do I think that me appearing in Greeley is just not an important moment for Unfound, but for the true crime podcasting community as a whole? Well, I'll tell you. Think about it this way. How many true crime podcasts are out there? 500? 1,000? I don't know the exact number, but we all know that it's more than 10 or 15. What this means on a daily basis, all these programs are covering some sort of crime and or mystery out there. All these hosts working independently on whatever topic compels them. And this has been going on for quite a while. Well before I ever started Unfound. What this means is over the last, say, 8 years, thousands of murders and rapes and unsolved mysteries and disappearances and everything else have been covered one way or the other, whether through interviews or on video or the accumulating of data. Yet despite all of that, despite all the coverage and investigation and research and reporting, before myself appearing on the stand for the Steve Pankey trial on October 21st and 22nd of 2021, when was the last time a true crime podcast host was called to testify about the work he or she has done? Frankly, I don't know the answer. I'm going to guess it's happened at least once over the last 8 years. However, given that not one circumstance like that comes to my mind immediately, that tells me what I did is very, very, very rare. But how can that be explained? You would think that with all the work with all the work out there being done, that some of it would be seen as being helpful in a trial. That some prosecutor would charge someone with murder and that this would happen due to a work a podcaster did. The odds would say that this should happen at least once a year. Yet, I'm sure it doesn't. This is all perplexing because I know that many true crime podcasters do hope their work might solve a case someday. And the work they do is allegedly crafted to make that happen. Then why is it that very little true crime podcast work ever appears in any kind of trial? Well, during my trip to Colorado and back, this topic was on my mind. And here are the answers that came to me. And I say the following knowing that there was no way in 2019, when I interviewed Steve Pankey, that I could have ever predicted I would be called to testify in 2021. No way. More to the point, I did not interview Steve with the idea /hope /desire to be called to testify when I interviewed him. Being called to testify is not my idea of fun. So here are my answers. Number one, for people in law enforcement and the legal profession, I don't think they take true crime podcasting very seriously. Why? Because I think there are just too many true crime podcasts that can contain hijinks and humor and jokes and sales pitches. Not to mention, some of these types are very, very popular. So if you're a person who dodges bullets for a living like a police officer, or if you are a prosecutor whose job depends on putting people away, are either going to put their careers in the hands of a true crime podcaster who feels like he has to tell a dirty limerick every episode. That's just an example, but you know what I mean. Or a podcaster who just can't help herself but use crimes and death as the basis for jokes. Seriously, if you were in the law enforcement or the legal profession, would you trust podcasters who did such things? Probably not. This lack of seriousness on too many true crime podcasts harms the product as a whole. My belief. I think this is also the reason that even when true crime podcasts do good work, that their work gets ripped off by mainstream news, like what 48 Hours did to me. Hey, at least they gave Unfound credit. On the other hand, someone like Nancy Grace is notorious for ripping podcasts and bloggers off without giving credit. Ask Lee Clifton, my guest for the Kelly Rothwell episode. Given that this was a theory that came to mind, this affected my behavior in Greeley. I wanted to make sure they all knew I took my job there seriously, that I didn't see it as a chance to further the Unfound brand or whatever, that I didn't see it as a way to make a name for myself. I ask you, being that all of you know more true crime podcasters than I do, how many of them would have seen testifying in front of a jury as a way to get more attention for themselves? Many, my opinion. More directly, how many would love to be involved in a trial just so they could say they were involved? Many. Whereas, I got to be honest, that's not my idea of a good time. Succinctly, I was there to tell the truth, and that's what I did. That's thought number one. Number two, despite all the output from true crime podcasters, I don't think many are really finding anything new. I think the reason not many get called to be put under oath is because the news was already out there for many years elsewhere. Really, no reason to call a podcaster in when the information was in a newspaper 20 years ago, right? For example, I now know the reason I was asked/required to go to Greeley, Colorado. My interview furthered a narrative the prosecution is trying to tell the jury. That trial is still going on, by the way. That Steve Pankey is a liar, and he doesn't mind telling people different stories to different people. He doesn't mind telling different stories to different people. Making stuff up as he goes. That he did that way back in 1985, and he did it as recently as October 2019 when I talked to him. In fact, I think I was the last interview he did. So what I did was useful. It was helpful. I think what also helped is that I work in true crime, and I'm used to asking true crime types of questions. Now that I think of it, maybe the best evidence of too many true crime podcasters not finding new info is that we now know many podcasters rejected Steve's offer of interviewing him. That is true. He contacted many other programs besides Unfound back in 2019. Every other true crime host rejected him. I accepted him. Why? Good question. Although I've admitted that it was not an easy decision for me to make. My opinion, true crime podcasters should not be so easily rejecting offers for interviews from people like Steve Pankey. Yes, I almost did, but for specific reasons unique to Unfound. Many other podcasts, they don't have the same programming concerns I do. Interviewing people like Steve Pankey could be helpful for law enforcement, the public, and a victim's family. Yet a multitude of podcast hosts rejected him. I want you to think about that. The third answer to this question I asked myself going to Greeley and back. I think a lot of people are into true crime podcasting for the kicks and fun and to not actually solve anything. Thus, ultimately, the crimes and pain and death only serve as a means for these hosts to market themselves. Because of this, if they do their jobs a little too well, then they might end up testifying somewhere. And, well, that's just a little too heavy for them. It's like the person you know who may be good at trivia or at chess or at Scrabble. Yet these people never test themselves against other smart people or try to go on a show like Jeopardy. Why? It's just too much work. And they might lose. Something like that. And we know that we think these people are crazy. Well, with true crime podcasters, it's much worse than that. They don't want the pressure because they're more concerned about themselves than they are about crimes getting solved. So what do? Yes, they have a true crime podcast, but it's the absolute minimums. Copying from Wikipedia, copying from WebSleuth, copying from the Trolley Project, and poof, there's an episode. They get to have the best of all worlds in their opinions. They get attention for their podcast, but they aren't doing anything seriously enough to ever have any pressure on them. So these are some answers to the question I asked myself as I traveled to Colorado and back. Dare I say it, and I'm not happy to say it, I don't see another true crime podcaster being part of a trial anytime soon. In fact, I would put higher odds of my retestifying in the Steve Pankey trial due to a hung jury in 2022 than I do of any other podcaster testifying in anything in 2022. And yes, I would not be surprised if Steve's trial ends in a hung jury for reasons I talked and wrote about in the Patreon blog. We as true crime podcasters, myself included, we have to work harder. Work better, even more importantly, act better. Act better. Represent ourselves better if we want to have an effect on crime. And if you aren't here to have a positive effect on the resolution of crimes, then what exactly are you doing? Next topic, Northwestern State University. Like the topic of the Pankey trial, I've talked about this quite a bit in the last couple weeks, so I'm not going to go through it all again. Really, these newsletters aren't meant to bore you. However, like the previous topic, I think the same kind of situation exists. From a true crime or journalism point of view, podcasters should be getting asked to speak to schools all the time. Podcasting is popular, true crime or not. It's a somewhat entrepreneurial, I hate that word. It's a somewhat entrepreneurial activity. It's mostly done by young people, except me. Still, not too many true crime podcasters are asked to speak to any college or university anywhere. Why? I think this goes back to the previous topic. I'm not sure how seriously people who do criminal justice for a living take true crime podcasting, whether it be law enforcement officials or criminal justice professors. Now, I will admit, on the other hand, I don't know how many podcasters are reaching out to schools. I have no idea, so that could be the reason. Yet you should know, I would not say it was quote-unquote difficult to get to speak at Northwestern State University. My assistant Natasha contacted them in March 2020, and I was due to speak at that school in May 2020. Yes, that's how quickly it was supposed to happen. Of course, COVID got in the way. It's the same way with Nova Southeastern University, where I will speak in a few days. Natasha contacted Dr. Telesco, and before I knew it, I was scheduled to speak at the school in April 2020. That didn't happen either due to COVID. But what came of it, I now do a spectacular monthly show with Dr. Telesco. So there is proof that professors and universities and teachers and colleges and programs are open to having true crime podcasters on campus. Yet given the huge number of true crime hosts, I think it is only a tiny fraction of the entire population that has given itself the opportunity to do any presentations or appearances. The issue could be that many people are not comfortable speaking. The issue could be that many people are not comfortable speaking in front of groups. Possible. The issue could be the hosts are too busy. Possible. The issue could be that they have nothing to really say to a group of early 20-somethings. Still, if only from a pure marketing point of view, I would think appearances would happen more. But they don't. There could be something else to this, though. You should know that both professors who happily accepted my request to speak at Northwestern University and Dr. Telesco, I'm going to read that again. There could be something else to this, though. You should know that the professor who happily accepted my request to speak at Northwestern University and Dr. Telesco at Nova Southeastern are ex-law enforcement, meaning they both know what they're talking about. They can quickly identify people who are serious about the topic of criminal justice and those who aren't. What I'm saying is these professors are not the type who would ever allow a true crime host to speak at their classes who also does dirty limericks on his program. You know what I mean. In conclusion, just like the podcasters in trials topic, this is one with a lot of different permutations. I think speaking at colleges in a teaching, not entertainment atmosphere can be a very positive development for true crime podcasters. However, I think a host must be of a certain type to do so, or the person won't be taken seriously. Austin Pivo. Justin Beasley, one of the 3 convicted for Austin's murder, was sentenced last week. He'll spend the next 27 years and 4 months in prison for what happened that morning. The other two guilty guys will be sentenced in either December or January. Why does this stuff take so long? I have no idea. What can we learn from Austin's murder? I think it shows how quickly these disappearances can happen. 1 second, they are all planning to go to work. The next, there's a fight, and 3 men are coming up with a way to hide Austin's remains. Snap of the fingers, that quickly. Something else to remember, and this just shows how much harder disappearances are to solve than bodies at the crime scene cases. Had Austin's body been found in that house, those 3 guys would have been charged immediately. Had Austin's body been found out in the street in front of the house, those 3 would have been in handcuffs the same day. Had Austin stumbled to a neighbor's house and died on the kitchen floor, the 3 killers would have been spending the night in jail. But because they successfully hid Austin's body, they got a few years of freedom before it was all figured out. That's how different murders are from disappearances. Unfound Now. If you haven't noticed yet, I released a new episode of the monthly video series this past weekend. I discussed and analyzed the disappearance of Wendy Gessing, who had disappeared from Crest Hill, Illinois in June. I was actually going to cover her disappearance last month, but decided to give investigators another month to get more details. Was the wait worth it? Probably not. There were no new developments for Wendy's case in October. In covering Wendy's disappearance, there was a major point that came to mind, but I did not want to explore it too deeply because nobody is even sure if it's true. And that is the often mentioned stories of missing people being seen at motels. This is certainly a thing in disappearances, to use 21st century terminology. Granted, I'm not sure the stats of Unfound show it. But there is certainly something to this, specifically people who actually live in a house or apartment, but for some reason they're seen several days in a row at a Motel 6 or La Quinta Inn or Days Inn or something like that. In fact, now that I think about it, the disappearance I covered for Unfound Now last month, September 2021, Michael Vaughn, his vehicle was left at a motel. What's going on with this? I think it's fairly straightforward. People rent rooms at these establishments to do drugs, for prostitution, for sex trafficking. Easy to cover up illegal activity at places like this. They can blend in among the regular law-abiding people who are there for the normal uses. I think what this means is when we encounter facts like these in disappearances, we must automatically go to the idea that the missing person is no longer with us. That this is either an outright murder or an overdose that has been covered up. Pretty sure. Very sure. Almost totally sure. But Ed, what about sex trafficking? You just mentioned it. Sure, we must consider it. However, I would need more information to come to that conclusion. The age of the missing person, the gender, a lot of other details. Plus, as many of you already know, I'm not convinced sex trafficking plays as big a role in disappearances as the public has been led to believe. But sure, I would certainly consider it if the facts support it. But it would rarely be my first choice. Tom Brown. Yep, gotta write about the recent occurrences. No, I'm not going to go through it all like I did during the recent live show. If you want to hear that, just tune into the live show I did for October 27th, like the last half hour at least. You can find that on Unfound's Podcast Channel on YouTube. Having said that, I have to admit that I've gotten to feeling icky when I write or talk about Tom's case. In my opinion, everything has gotten so out of hand, and I feel when I comment on it that it only furthers the ickiness, despite that not being my intentions. It's all become a smaller version of Gabby Petito's murder, the Gabby Petito murder. Outrageousness, sensationalism, innuendo, obsession, obfuscation, double standards, hypocrisy. It's all there. It's a true crime nightmare. Now, I can fully admit that I think Unfound's coverage in 2018 did not help matters. Yes, to some extent, the relationship between Sheriff Lewis, Phil Klein, and the AG's office was already a crap sandwich when I found out about Tom's disappearance in 2018. For sure. However, with me analyzing the videos better than anybody had to that point, coupled with Penny's first words to me that she believed law enforcement caused Tom's disappearance, that sent the rumor mill spinning. To quote Chris Rock, they're spinning. That's from a stand-up comedy routine I think he did in about 2009. And I allowed it to happen. I've learned a lot since then. Keep in mind, to that point, I had covered about 80 disappearances. Something like that. Since then, I've featured about 140. I am a much more seasoned and experienced missing persons analyst now than I was during the summer of 2018. I'll admit, I think I became knee-deep in the hoopla, to quote Starship. Because of that, and realizing I'm at least a wee bit responsible for the hysterics that people experienced in 2018 due to Unfound's coverage, I've tried to become the voice of reason, especially after the AG's report came out in August 2019. I think I've played it fairly even-handedly since then. I've pissed off Phil Klein. I've probably upset Penny a few times. I've certainly made no friends in the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office, etc., etc., etc. All in all, I've tried to extricate myself from the mosh pit. The problem, nobody else has. In fact, with recent events, everybody else just wants to bang into each other harder. Really, what else can explain Phil Klein playing a recording of a convicted felon telling a highly unlikely story during his presentation? What else can explain the AG's office saying that charges should probably be brought against Penny and others, but they haven't done so? What else can explain the Canadian Record portraying itself as if it has no rooting interest in any of this, but at the time they happily got the unethical recording of that August 2019 meeting without revealing to the public who made it? What else can explain Penny not revealing in her interview with me that she had Tom's phone case while all his friends insisted at the time that Tom's phone and its case were never apart? Really, what is going on here? The darkly humorous part? I'm still open to any and all theories regarding Tom's death. Yes, I wrote a blog on my Patreon site back in 2018 where I stated I believed a scenario where I stated I believed a certain... I'll start that over. Yes, I wrote a blog on my Patreon site back in 2018 where I stated I believed a certain sheriff was probably responsible. I am less convinced of that now, but I'm not going to delete it. Why? Because I will not be accused of trying to rewrite history. Ed Densel does not cover things up. However, as I've already done in this newsletter, I've admitted my mistakes. That everybody else has not admitted to their mistakes and transgressions and lies since November 2016 when Tom disappeared, that they are so hardened in their positions that they insist they've done nothing wrong, that they insist they continue to do everything right, yet Tom's death is still unsolved, is the problem. This reminds me of Mara Murray's disappearance. That case has about 5 different hardened positions too. And I was telling an interviewer during my time in Greeley, Colorado, it's gotten to the point in Mara's where all sides would rather her disappearance never be solved so as to maintain their status than her disappearance be solved and some, if not all of them, risk being proven wrong. That is pride, my friends, and it's one of the 7 deadly sins. and it is now rampant in Tom's investigation. That's all I have for this month. Thanks for reading.